counting at least 25 attendees or more online. Senator, thank you for that observation. Whether, of course, people are actually behind their cameras and there's actually anyone at the screen at the other end is a completely different question, but one proceeds on the assumption that that's the case, of course. Very well. Well, it does mean, of course, very little people will have very much to say. Very well, we continue with with public business, and the next item is the Les Canaves Park Flats loan scheme rescindment P54, lodged by Deputy Tadier. The purpose of this debate, the main respondent will be the Minister for Housing and Communities. Deputy Tadier, you've lodged an amendment. Do you wish the Assembly to take the proposition read as amended?
Yes, please.
Would members indicate if they are not content with taking the proposition as amended, in which case we can have a discussion about it?
I'm happy to have it as amended.
I mean, if just people would indicate in the chat if they're not content, and I'll give just a few seconds for that to hear. Very well, then I think I'll ask the greffier to read the proposition as amended.
The States are to decide whether they're of opinion to refer to their Act of 22nd April 2021, in which they approved, in accordance with the Public Finances Jersey law. Yeah. I'm sorry, greffier, but we've now just received a message of not content from Deputy Lewis. Okay. I think the position is that it's not a matter for the Assembly to decide. Members are entitled to have these things put separately, and therefore we'll take it in two stages. Would the greffier please read the proposition as unamended?
States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to refer to their Act of 22nd April 2021, in which they approved, in accordance with the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019, a variation to the perpetual terms of the 99-year Leaseholders Fund to enable monies from the fund to be lent to property owners in the Canaves Park flats for the repair of balconies, and to rescind that Act.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. Can I just seek clarification? Did you say that it's is this being taken as amended? Or?
No, this proposition is now taken in its original form, which is not amended. When the well, I think we now have to put the amendment, don't we? And we have to vote upon the amendment.
I'd have thought so.
If you just bear a moment. Yes, I think you speak to the main proposition. I agree with the greffier. I think you speak to the main proposition, Deputy. Then if that's seconded, but before we open the debate on the main proposition, you then also propose the amendment, and the amendment is determined. So people know when they are speaking, finally, whether they're speaking to it as amended or not. So if you speak to the unamended proposition, please, first.
I did have a point of order and procedure, sir, though. Surely if I'm asking for it to be taken as amended, then that should be put to the Assembly to decide. And I didn't think that one member could override that. I understand that.
No, I think it's been put in as an amendment. Members are entitled to vote on these things separately. I don't think you can require it to be taken as amended.
Okay, but I'm not requiring this. I'm just asking if members would agree for it to be taken as amended. That's surely separate.
No, I think the position is that any member is entitled to require that an amendment is put separately.
Okay, that's fine. It's just new to me. I hadn't realised that, sir.
No, that's fine, definitely. Please do.
So I'll make the original proposition. I'll perhaps explain in that why I put an amendment into it as well.
Yes,
so,
that might make sense, and it will probably make your proposal of the amendment somewhat shorter in any event.
Thank you, sir. So the original proposition as it currently stands in an unamended form simply asks for a rescindment of the decision that the states made on the 20th of April to set up this loan scheme. And I suppose early on, it's probably important to talk about the thought process behind that and why it goes hand in hand really with the amendment. The proposition was put in after some conversation and with colleagues in St Brelard. I'm not saying that it happened with the approval necessarily of them, but it was part of an ongoing conversation with my colleagues, but also the housing minister. And it was the housing minister that I've been dealing with really as the political contact in terms of a ministerial position, although there has been officer support from both housing and from Treasury. So those, and that's really detailed, I think, in my main report. And the reason I've put the amendment in, if we deal with that perhaps early on, is because it would leave us in a kind of no man's land or no woman's land. If we were to simply rescind this, it means that there wouldn't be a loan scheme in place. But it was also done anticipating that the minister himself had given a verbal undertaking at the time to review the terms of the loan, and that any changes to the terms of the loan would need to come back to the states anyway. And indeed, the housing minister has lodged something on Monday, which deals with an extension of the period in which anyone taking the loan out to help pay for their balconies would be given up to 15 years rather than 10 if the states were to agree to that. So, so that hopefully gives some context. The other bit of context that I think is necessary to give, and which I've explained in the report, is that it's unfortunate that a lot of the concerns that the residents had weren't made publicly known to many of us until after the actual debate of P19 had happened. I don't make any criticism of that, because I know that, first of all, it's been a very difficult 18 months. And indeed, when we had our public meeting on the 4th of May at Communicare, which about 20 householders came to, and that was it was capped at that number because of the ongoing guideline restrictions that were in place. It would have been attended by a lot more. There's a lot more interest in it. Someone came up to me afterwards and said, you know, we're sorry that we've raised this fairly late in the day, but really we haven't been kept in the loop. There have been some discussions that we've only partly heard of. None of us, we haven't had a meeting that we could have all attended in the last year because of COVID, and they felt that a lot of these discussions were happening without their input. And again, I'm not saying that's because their input wasn't sought. So I think that a lot of people were acting in good faith, whether it's from the side of Brunel's or the Treasury or the housing minister, who was putting, you know, had input into these things. But I think certainly certain people fell between the cracks, and it's become apparent, I think, to all of us who have been involved in this, that there were certain key facts that we wouldn't have been aware of on the 20th of April when it came to the States Assembly. And I've listed these in the main proposition. They can be listed essentially as 5 themes that came up from correspondence and in the meeting, which was to do with problems with the loan scheme. The first was affordability. And there are 2 issues here with affordability. Is that some people, because of the means testing nature of it, won't be able to access the state's loan. Yet there are many people who own or who are leaseholders of these flats who simply don't have the disposable income. They might own over the cap for capital and for income, which has been set by Treasury, but it doesn't mean they're by any means wealthy, or that they have that money to hand, or that those savings, where they are savings, are necessarily available for spending on the on those projects. You're gonna have to excuse me. There's the Broncos going on, I think, outside, and that's not something which is my fault. But it's a great Jersey tradition, isn't it? But it does sometimes impact on us from a noise point of view.
Well, I think definitely we can say that we actually can't hear it, but if it's disturbing you, then they have a sympathy.
It's strange how the acoustics can work sometimes. So it's probably distracting me, but I'll try and battle on through it. So there was that aspect, but there's also a paradox, I guess, is that because the loans were offered to individuals who would struggle to get a commercial loan from the bank, the States is offering them the loan themselves. But a lot of these people that I've spoken to said, look, I simply can't afford the loan, even if it's offered to me on an interest-free, on a capital, an interest-only repayment, so with the capital being paid back at some point in the future. And I did put that to one of the gentlemen, so I've used the gentleman as an example. He's on I would call it a modest income. It's certainly well below the median wage, and I've listed that in the report to my amendment. He's been living with his son. He's a single parent. His son's got special circumstances and challenges. That means that the father's had to dedicate a lot of time to him, and he's a leaseholder, so he's not an owner of the flats. He's not a freeholder. And just to clarify the difference there, because I think this is going to be a theme that perhaps comes up in the main debate, is that there are clearly lots of different circumstances for the 96 flats and the people who live in them and or the people who own those flats. But 25 of the 96 apartments there are actually not owned outright by the people who live in them. They're leaseholders. They're on a 99-year lease. They were taken out in originally in 1965, so the clock's been ticking on that, and they're states-owned properties, states-owned homes. So part of the problem we've got here is that we know, and we'll look at that in a moment, is that there for my part and my interpretation of what's been written, there are clearly admissions of, I'll call it culpability, but I don't mean that in any kind of absolute or legal sense, but the States has held its hand up and said, you know, these balconies weren't built properly, they should have been built properly, and they weren't built to the original design request. And of course that wasn't picked up until only a couple of years ago. Therein lies the problem. That's why we're here today. But some of these don't own the flats, and some of them are in a position of probably never owning their flats outright. And if the natural course follows, then in about 45 years' time, these flats will revert to the States, and they are ultimately owned by the States anyway. That's simply a leasehold. So this gentleman in question is a leaseholder, and the way I look at that, although it's not an exact parallel, is that you're effectively a renter. You're renting off the States, and you paid your rent in advance on a long lease, and it's yours as long as you relinquish that lease, which will have, of course, a value to you, but it diminishes over time. So unlike ordinary property, which people expect to continually increase in value, often above inflation, when it comes to a leasehold, if you're selling the leasehold on, that is diminishing over time because there's less time left on the leasehold. I hope that's understood, and it's not controversial to say that. And the Minister will no doubt give some technical nuances later if he feels the need. But that's essentially where we are. So we have a man who's probably approaching retirement, maybe in 5-10 years' time, and his son, who's now a young adult living with him. And he said, well, I simply can't afford to pay this, even if it's interest only. How am I going to pay the capital back in 10 years' time? How's my son supposed to pay the capital back in 10 years' time? And if it was, of course, if it was a bank giving this, they'd ask for reassurances about how you would afford it in the future. So there is a paradox that although this is being done to help those who can't afford it, there is an affordability question for those who can't afford it and who are not actually, and he's told me he's not going to take the loan. And I guess the question that throws up is that where does that leave Brunel and the association if some people are not in a position to take the loan that the states are offering. So one of the things I did ask the Minister to consider, and indeed Senator Pallett and Deputy Truscott were all at that meeting, and I think it's fair to say we've been working fairly closely on this, even though we may have slightly different positions and have drawn slightly different conclusions. We'll wait and see. Is that we asked the Minister, not just, we didn't necessarily even ask him to extend the period of the loan, because of course it just means that if you're on an interest only, you're paying the loan back over 15 years rather than 10 years. It means you're paying more and you've got a longer period to wait to pay that loan back. We did ask that the means testing be removed. I can't really understand what the means testing serves, because there are people there, as I've said, who can probably afford to pay back the loan, but they don't have necessarily the income to pay for the repairs in one lump sum, which is what they would currently have to do for that. So, you know, it seems to me that the Minister should have considered that. He hasn't considered it, or he certainly hasn't acquiesced to that request yet. And the interest on the loan, you know, we asked if, given the fact that there is an admission of some culpability on the part of the states, that why it needed to be set at a 2% rate, which is of course far more than any person will be getting in terms of interest in their own account. There's the other consideration, and I know these are not all absolute definitive arguments for either rescinding or for the states paying for this, but these are part of the complexities that were raised, and I think helps us understand a bit more where people are coming from. Is that the money is being demanded up front. So although there are 8 blocks of flats, each with 12 units in them, some on the ground floor which don't have a balcony. So, you know, initially the people on the ground floor were a bit perplexed as to why they're having to pay to repair balconies that they don't own. That's just because it's part of a collective. So everyone has a pro rata, if you like, liability. That's what is usually the case. And there are 8 blocks of flats, so 8 12s are 96. That's how we get to that number. And because there's one contractor doing all the work, it means that whilst the work might start straight away, it could be a couple of years, and it's likely to be a couple of years before some of the flats actually get finished. And again, that begs the question, why are people being asked to pay up front for building work before it's even been started, let alone completed? That's certainly not what any of us would do if we were engaging. You'd possibly have to put a deposit down, but you'd normally want to wait until the work had been done to your satisfaction before you paid for it. And again, you know, if the states had done that in the first place and inspected and signed off the building work thoroughly, then we wouldn't be in this position in the first place. So just to recap that, the issues that they raised with us is affordability, being charged interest on the loan, the potential period of the loan, the criteria for the loan. And then the last point that kept on coming up is that the fault lay with the housing department of the day. And so I'm minded, I think, to now want to switch to the merits of the amendment, but I'm mindful that the Minister, who incidentally said he's not content for this to be taken as amended, didn't indicate that to me in any way prior to this debate. And you know, he could have sent me a quick email to tell me, or issued comments. Been no comments paper, I note, on this amendment or on the main proposition. So I'm left in a bit of a difficult position in the sense that I think the amendment and the rescindment have to go together, and I would like to argue on behalf of the 96 residents, or at least some of those 96 residents and owners, as to why I think the state should pay for that.
Surely the position is, as a matter of logic, they obviously don't have to go together. The rescindment motion can stand alone, and the amendment seeking the payment of the costs of the balconies by the states could stand as a quite separate idea. So the right thing for you to do is to, if you've concluded the speech you want to give on the main rescindment, but you wish to move on to who pays for it at the end of the day, then you probably would wish to move the main proposition now. If it is then seconded, then you can speak to the amendment after that. Would that be of assistance to you? Does that help you, Deputy?
Trying to be as candidly speaking, I think that the bottom line is that I would like to be able to debate today. And as I said, on behalf of the stakeholders and the as a representative for that district, I'd like to be able to debate the states paying for the repairs. And the concern I've got here, and that's the understanding I had putting this together with the amendment with advice from the GREF, is that the concern I've got is that, of course, if we don't take this as amended, then I'm asking simply for a rescindment. And if the states say, no, we don't want to rescind the loan scheme, then I clearly can't debate the amendment. So I'm in the hands of members, really.
Well,
that's why
basically, I think the position is this, Deputy, really, that it's not a question of it's going to be taken as unamended. What you now have the chance to do, if you move your rescindment motion and you ask for it to be seconded, the next thing that falls to be debated is whether or not you should be allowed to amend it. And you can then speak at length to the amendment. And if members are satisfied that the amendment should form part of the main proposition, then it will form part of the main proposition, which is ultimately debated. And that will include, if members have agreed, the part of the proposition that says the state should pay for it. So I don't think that either you or those on whose behalf you bring it will be disadvantaged by this process or procedure. It's just a question of taking it in steps.
Yes, thank you. So I understand that now.
Yes. So
I've lost my perspicacity, sir, and yours is most welcome.
Sir, Deputy Lewis.
Well, I'm sorry. This can't be a toing and froing. The position is, Deputy Taddy, is that you're making the proposition at the moment without the amendment, but as soon as it's seconded, you will then be asked to move the amendment. That's the way the procedure appears to be working. I don't think there's any way of derailing that particular procedure at this point. But if you said all you want to say in support of the rescindment part of the argument, then the correct thing to do, in my judgment, would be for you to simply then move the rescindment. If someone is going to second it, and it's difficult to believe that somebody would not second that, then you would move straight on to deal with the payment part of it, which is your amendment. So does that assist? I'm not sure, Deputy Lewis, that there's any place for you to interject at this point.
I was just trying to be helpful, sir, that if it's helpful to members, I would withdraw my objection.
Well, I'm sorry, Deputy, it's far too late to do that now. The matter has now been moved and has been read as unamended, and therefore it must be dealt with as unamended. It can be cut through quickly from a procedural point of view if, as soon as Deputy Tadier has finished making the argument for the rescindment, we will then move straight on to deal with the amendment. But we can't now suddenly have put a proposition to the Assembly unamended and then suddenly change courses towards the end of the proposer's speech. That would mean that everything said so far has been wasted, and we would need to start again, and procedure doesn't provide for that. So, Deputy Tadier, it's a matter for you, but it seems to me you can either now formally make your proposition for a rescindment. When that's seconded, we'll move straight on to discuss the amendment, and members will then decide whether they accept the amendment. If they do, then you can argue the entire proposition as amended, which is what you wish to do in the first place. But I think it's too late to change your mind, Deputy Lewis, halfway through the game a little bit. So what do you wish to do, Deputy Tadier?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thanks for the clarification. So I've almost finished proposing this. I'll just make some closing remarks and then
please do. Yes,
I'll move it as you suggested. Just incidentally, I think I got confused because I think it's been such a long time since we haven't allowed a mover of a proposition to take it unamended. But
it is quite unusual. Yes.
but it's good. I think it's good to remind ourselves that there is a process, and this is the normal way that things maybe used to be done. So excuse me for my confusion there. In summing up, really, the reason I'm asking for this to be rescinded is to allow the terms of the loan itself to be amended. And I'll indeed give further, as I said in my report, at the time of writing that, I was giving further consideration as to whether to ask the states to agree to make the cost of the repair work itself via what I would term an ex gratia payment. So that's clearly what I am asking for in the amendment, but I still think there's enough merit in the rescindment itself, because there are clearly issues that we didn't know about that have been presented to us subsequent to the 20th of April. And not to mention the fact that the Minister himself is bringing back a proposition to amend that. So, sir, I do make the proposition and ask for it to be seconded.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well. There's an amendment to the proposition, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph 1, after the word act at the end of the paragraph, insert the following words, and to agree that the full cost of the repair of the balconies shall be met by Jersey Property Holdings.
Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. I guess just to expedite things from a procedural point of view from the beginning, is that I will be asking that the loan is rescinded and that the states meet the full cost. And so I think in reality, if people want the states to meet the liability, they vote for the amendment, and if they don't think that's right, then they vote against the amendment. I'm not going to go back to asking for the main proposition to be concluded unless there's an objection and people really want to debate that. I think even though procedurally that's technically the case, I think we can have one debate here on the merits of the states paying for the work to be done. And if that amendment loses, then I'll take that as a message from the Assembly that they don't want the states to pay for it. And noting that we will, of course, have an opportunity to discuss the Minister's proposal and possible amendments which would be put to that to deal with the issue, some of the issues raised in the main proposition. So I hope that's helpful. I'm not trying to cheat anybody out of a debate, and I'm also not trying to encourage people not to vote for this. I do hope that I will make a good and strong case as to why I think the states should fund the bill for the repairs. So turning to that amendment, sir, I'm asking for the Treasury to meet the costs of the repairs to the Lekenove balconies, simply because it was an error in the original build that led to the defects with those said balconies. I don't know if it was simply an act of oversight or whether there was some negligence on the part of the builder or the states, whether the builder or the contractor who did the work on behalf of the states was trying to cut corners, whether he didn't follow the plans that were in place, or it was simply some kind of incompetence. But the result is that now, in 2019, around that time, it was discovered that the balconies had been built incorrectly. And from what I understand, it's because the beams that were put in there were hollow rather than solid, and it's made them unsafe. And I would say that there will be questions about legal responsibility in here. In the report, the ministers said, and I quote from that in his main report in P19 on page 3, he said it was explained that there was no legal obligation on the government to provide support. However, as the fault was resultant of the original construction method, it was felt that a moral duty existed to provide a means of assistance to rectify those issues. Now, I don't know if in fact a legal obligation does exist, and it's difficult to know if the 96 owners of the flats or leaseholders of the flats all clubbed together and paid for legal advice and a suit, whether or not that would be admissible. There is clearly some economic loss which is being experienced by the owners and leaseholders here. They're being asked to pay for repairs to their balconies, or in some cases balconies which they don't own, which are owned by the states of Jersey. So there's clearly a reason that they might want to consider a lawsuit of some kind of tort. There's of course statutes of limitations, and it's not clear here whether they would be successful going that far back, or in fact whether or not the fact that this was only discovered in the last couple of years means that they could pursue that. But I think the reality is it's very difficult to take on the states with its deep pockets when you're a group of disparate individuals who simply share the same circumstances of living within the same association. So I think I'm not going to focus too much on the legal arguments here, but I am going to focus on the and I was expecting a question to the AG at some point, sir. I'm wondering if that is to be dealt with now, sir, or maybe when I finish my speech. I'm happy to give way, sir, now, if that's in accordance with procedure.
It can be, but it's a question for the Attorney General, and Deputy Morell has indicated he's happy to do that after you've concluded your speech, Deputy. So
thank you. It's helpful. So what I want to focus on here is, irrespective of what legal responsibility the states today might have on these residents, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because that's not the principal argument I'm making. I'm making the argument that we have a moral responsibility to the tenants and the owners, in the same way that the minister has used exactly the same words, that he felt there was a moral duty that exists to provide a means of assistance to those owners. And I guess it's good that we agree on that. If you have a good starting point, then you can explore your common ground. And I suppose the main difference here is that I come to a different conclusion. I say, because you're morally responsible for the defect and the ongoing liability that is being passed on to the modern day owners, you also therefore should have a moral responsibility to pay for it. And I know arguments will be made, well, if you bought your property off a private purchaser, seller, and you discovered a problem with it later, then you wouldn't be able to claim off them. I think that the state should hold itself to a higher duty of care in that. And I don't see that, you know, I see this very much as a form of redress. A fault has been made aware to us, and it's been made those who bought the flats, it's been made aware to them as well that there's this issue. And we do often produce redress after an event, even if there isn't strict legal liability. The minister also went on to say that it is considered that even in the 1960s, the expertise of the architect, engineer and contractor should have highlighted the risks and swayed the decision away from using such beams on the balconies. He continues that the Minister for Housing and Communities believes that the states should assist the residents with the cost of the repairs because the flats were built with a fundamental defect that ought to have reasonably been avoided. So I think the moral argument there is very clear. This could and ought to have been reasonably avoided. It wasn't. For some reason, it was never picked up at any of the survey stages, either when it was built, when some of the flats were signed off from leasehold to freehold. The private structural surveys didn't seem to flag this up, although some individuals did realise that there were problems with the balconies themselves, and they managed to fix them themselves. One gentleman, including one family, using fiberglass to do that, and they haven't had a problem in the last 25 years with it. But they paid for that themselves. But you know, he was somebody who had the wherewithal and the knowledge to do that. So the moral responsibility, I would argue, is for the minister to offer financial assistance, not in the form of a means-tested loan repayable with interest, but to pay for it themselves. And this has been going on for quite a long time, you know, and there is a fund that's been set up, the leaseholders, 99-year leaseholders fund. And there is money that has been accrued to the Treasury from people when they've switched, from these residents when they've switched from the 99-year leases to the flying freehold. They've effectively bought that out and they've paid the difference for that. That's money which the Treasury has already got from them. There was the leaseholder money which was put into the kitty in the first place. So this isn't them asking for a handout of taxpayers' money. These are people who have in good faith bought or acquired different types of property, either leasehold or freehold, from the states, and it's not been fit for purpose, and it is as much a consumer issue as it is one of affordability for those individuals. Now, I've given a couple of examples in that. I talked about the single parent in the flat who he's paying a mortgage. This is an interesting scenario. He's paying a mortgage for a flat he doesn't actually own, and it's not, and it's to pay for the leasehold. So he's given a lump sum at some point to purchase the leasehold, and he has to pay that rent every month. And as I said, most people who pay rent to a landlord are not expected to maintain their buildings. Now, I know that this is slightly different. There is a responsibility within the contract to pay for the upkeep. States normally pay for it and then it's recharged to the leaseholders. But this is a different scenario. This is a scenario of an original construction failure, which we're asking some of the poorest residents of these flats to pay. And I personally don't think that's fair. This is something that the states can afford and I think should afford to do. He's not the only leaseholder in those 96 flats. I don't want to talk too personally about any of the individuals, but there are equally other individuals who I would classify as much more vulnerable, some of whom I've known since young, who have only lived in that area. They're not people who've acquired properties to try and flip and sell on. They're people who've acquired a leasehold and they're quite happy with that, brought their families up, and who simply, if I'm honest, would be in social housing if it weren't for the fact that this kind of scheme was put forward in 1965. And another owner has said to me, you know, we're not rich. If we were rich, people are suggesting we should sell these flats and move somewhere else. But they pointed out that these are some of the cheapest properties that you can acquire, cheapest homes that you can acquire and live in Jersey. And they're quite happy with that. They love the area that they're living in. They have got these flats and they're quite happy living there, but they're not in a position to have the disposable income. And when we look at the ceiling that's been put on by the minister, it's £10,000 of savings. If you're above that, then you're supposed to pay for these repairs yourself. But we know that having £10,000 in the bank, a lot of these people who are on that kind of capital have saved it for a particular reason. It might be because they've got children going to university. It might be because they don't have a proper pension. And indeed, this couple said, we've got savings of about £10,000 and this money's been put away for our retirement to help subsidise our poor pension because we don't have full contributions. And, you know, they're doing that. They've done the right thing and this money simply isn't available. So in conclusion, sir, I'd like to bring it back to some fundamental points. Is that the original building work was signed off by somebody from the States who signed off those structures, and nothing was picked up. The flats were built with a fundamental defect that ought to have been reasonably avoided. Now, these are the words of the minister. This is governmental spokesperson words. The second point is that the fault was the result of a original construction method which was faulty, and the scrutiny panel as well have said that they felt a moral duty existed to provide a means of assistance to rectify the issues. Now, I know that lots of members here and listening to this will have sympathy for the residents and the owners, but quite frankly, it's not our sympathy that they want. It's some kind of tangible acknowledgement that this isn't their problem. They are being faced with an economic loss due to something which the states caused. And it comes back to the point that who caused this problem and who is being asked to pay for the problem. So in terms of natural justice, and I apologise if it's a slightly quaint and simple notion, is that it wasn't them who caused the problem, it was the states who caused the problem. Who is it that's being asked to pay for the problem? They're being asked to pay for the problem. It shouldn't be them who should be paying for this. It should be the states to pay for rectifying this issue. And I've just added one of the other principles of natural justice is in Latin. I'm not a great Latin speaker, incidentally, but audi autorem partem, or hear the other party. And I think what's been absent up until this point is that the voice of the owners and the leaseholders hasn't really been heard. And I know that, thankfully, I do want to acknowledge the work of the scrutiny panel, because they did a piece of work looking at the loans. They weren't necessarily engaged, or they didn't have the same problems flagged up to them at that point that they perhaps know about now. But also Senator Ferguson, she's the one who was really stepping in at the beginning, and who some of the flat owners asked to engage with Senator Ferguson. And I am really grateful for what she's done. She acknowledged that there's a problem here, and I think very much a compromise position was come to around having this loan scheme, which again I acknowledge is being done for the best of intentions, but is flawed for so many reasons. And so, sir, not only am I asking for that rescindment today, but I'm asking that we rescind it and that the states pay for this. I do want to address finally, because it's a strong argument that will come up, the issue about precedent. Indeed, it's come up in some of the conversations I've had with my fellow local representatives in the area, and there is a concern that this will set a precedent. Well, the first question I would ask is, a precedent for what? Are there lots of properties out there which have been sold to the public from the states, which have been badly constructed, and which the states and the minister has written a document saying, look, we acknowledge that we're guilty of these errors, these construction errors. I don't think this is going to set a precedent. I think this should be seen very much as a one-off situation in which there are specific, there's been a specific acknowledgement right through that this wasn't the problem of those who bought it, and that it could and should have been picked up at the beginning. Those are the words of the minister, that this could and ought to have been picked up at the time, but it wasn't. And I don't think we're going to find ourselves in that situation again, where we're presented with a historic problem, which the minister has admitted to in writing, and then which we're being asked to pay for. I don't see that. But even if that is the case, and somebody makes the same argument for a block of flats in their constituency, it will still need to come to the states, and they'll still need to argue that on the merits of the case, which is what I'm doing here today, sir. So I think those are the main points I want to cover. And I do remind members that there will be questions to the Attorney General, but I'm not interested in the state's legal responsibility in all of this. I am interested in the state's moral responsibility about doing what's right, yes, to my constituents, but also to islanders generally who have bought properties or leased properties off the states in good faith, only to be faced with huge bills that they can't reasonably afford to pay, and that they, I would argue, shouldn't have to pay.
Thank you very much. Is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? I beg your pardon, Deputy Morell, you had a question for the Attorney General. I'd forgotten that. What is your question?
Thank you, sir. The question relates directly to the part of the speech where Deputy Tadier started asking or speculating that maybe legal grounds for a kind of legal review of this situation. So I wanted to ask the Attorney General, in his view, is there a likelihood that the owners or leaseholders would have such grounds? From my perspective, and obviously I am very far from being a lawyer, but I've always thought that Jersey having a kind of buyer beware element to purchase of property. So I personally don't see that there are legal grounds, but if the Attorney General might be able to, without opening the floodgates to any legal challenges, but if you might be able to advise the Assembly.
Mr. Attorney, are you able to assist the Assembly with regard to what the legal remedies, if any, might be at this time?
So yes, I believe I can. I should stress before I start that I've only read.
I'm sorry, Mr. Attorney, you're breaking up.
It
It's
is
not
indeed.
clear coming through at all. Should we try that again? Mr. Attorney, are you able to hear us? Yes, I think so. What we'll do is we'll proceed with the debate, and we will seek to come back to the Attorney General in due course. Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I was going to hold off for the attorney, but I thought I would fill the gap, as it were. Look, I'm grateful to Deputy Tadier because, you know, listening to Debbie Tadier, you know, he does spend a long time in his speeches. That's not a complaint, but on this occasion, he's filled in a lot of gaps for me, which I didn't know about this. And I mean, in particular, the things that I have picked up there is that here was buildings that were built in the 60s, presumably as part of states' loans arrangements, were sold through leases. And then the state later on, in fact, the states then, 99-year leases they were sold on with states' loans, presumably. And then later on, I can't remember exactly when, probably a number of years ago, then freeholds were offered. And then a majority of people had bought those freeholds. And of course, what we've got is a mixture of people. We've got some people in the flats who have bought the freeholds recently, because you know these get transacted frequently, I would guess, because they are very as the attractive flats for people in that market. Some will have been the people that bought the leases or transferred their lease to a freehold and still there. And then other people are original leaseholders that have not been able to take up the freeholders. And of course, most of those people are likely to be of advanced years. And of course, and they're all facing different situations. So the leaseholders, they're in a position where of the 99 years, 56 years is gone. And so they're on a declining assets. And so my guess is to be that the more years that go on, those assets are worth less, will be worth less, because people won't be able to buy those leaseholds, and no bank is probably going to give a loan on that basis. I'm getting a lot of echo, sir. Is it me? I don't know whether to.
Well, there is some echo. There is some echo. I'm advised by the greffier, if you turn your volume down a little bit, Deputy Young, then we may be in a better position.
Okay, right, I'll try. Oops.
We can still hear you, though.
Right. Okay. So I don't know if that's it. It means I probably won't be able to hear you, sir. So, but I've done that. Okay. So we've got the leaseholders in that situation. We're on a declining lease. And I particularly was very concerned to hear that there is a requirement for people to hand over their savings because these deputies right in advanced years. Those monies are important to people because of their low pensions, because we know a very large proportion of people do not receive Jersey pensions, and every time we fix the pension rates, those people, only get a portion of the pension. I think the last figures I saw are about, just under 70% of pensioners are on full pensions, but a lot aren't. And that is their only hedge against living costs, or they may want to give money to their grandchildren or something for their school or something. So to have a scheme whereby that you have to pay that over, I really troubles me. And secondly, the idea of extending a term doesn't seem to work either, because as the deputy said, it leaves the situation when how they're going to repay that at the end, even if they just pay interest only at some point, unless there's some arrangement in the in the loan. So for me, I think that loan scheme sounds as if it's got some holes in it. And I wonder, this is where it leads me to wonder whether the solution being proposed is the right one, because to me, I think the obvious thing to have done would be to go back and change the loan scheme and make it much more flexible. And I do have some experience of this in a previous life where, there have been incidents in Jersey where people face major structural problems. I can remember a landslip once of a number of state-owned properties, and there was no bank that would fund it. The states put together a scheme and provided flexible funding to enable those people to basically recover their homes were at risk. And that was flexible. So I think that the loan scheme we've got here is plainly far too, why has it got those restrictions at all? I wonder. And then I think, we've got this question of the defect. Now, there at the moment, I don't think I'm persuaded at the moment that the answer is for the states to just say, oh, this is a real mess. It's a real shambles. Let's just put our hand in our pockets and pay for this. Because we're talking probably 1.2 million, I think, on the figures we've seen. 96 flats at 28,000. Sorry, no, let's get this right. 10 to 12,000 each. That's 1.2 million. So it's not a minor matter. But of course, the question I ask is that when people transact property, and a lot of these properties will have been transacted, normally you have a survey, and as I think as the deputy said, there is a question: what was known at the time properties are transacted? Now this probably is and I'll add to the AG's questions that when he comes in, perhaps he might answer it. My understanding is that when transactions of property, the seller has to do a response to questions from the purchaser. And if there are things said in that representation that doesn't disclose honestly what is known about the condition of the property, then it seems to me that there's some potential route of redress. Now, of course, that will be on an individual basis. But I'm also troubled, because I didn't know this, that the property is managed by a private property manager. And I don't, I'm not. The question I ask is, well, what was their role in this? Did they know? Was it known? When was it known that this defect was there? And I'm a little bit worried that this might be long-standing, because in the deputy's amendment, he says that one of the people that he's spoken to says, well, when we were originally told it was going to be about 3,000 or 4,000 to put it right, and now it's 10 to 12,000. And that suggests to be that this has been known for a long time. And if it was known, I asked, well, why in some cases wasn't it disclosed? And of course, the position of freeholders is different, because even if there is this liability, I'd be amazed if these owners haven't achieved increases in their capital value, particularly as the astonishing rise in the property market. So I think we've got a situation where the effects will bind on different owners differently. And I think myself, I would want to go back to that loan scheme and sort out the snags of it and find a way. Unless, of course, there is evidence of a misrepresentation when those properties were transacted, or intentional non-disclosure, which I'd certainly value the AG's view on, because if there is, it seems to me that's something that shouldn't be ignored. And of course, it is not unusual in my experience. Look, building standards in Jersey have massively improved over the years. Up-to-date building regulations weren't really introduced until the late 90s. And since then, fortunately, particularly on residential dwellings, we've had much better constructional standards. And the reality is, I'm afraid, there are a lot of properties in the island that predate those building regs that really do have non-compliance with building regs, and if any work were done to them, they need to be brought up to standard. And thankfully, most of those issues aren't critical. But of course, in the case of flats, they are much more troublesome because they have to be done for all of the occupiers of the multi-occupation unit and not just one. So here you are in a situation where, you have to have solutions which are collective. But I still question whether the amendment, i.e., look, let's just fight it all off and let's just pay the cost for the taxpayer. I question whether that's the right one, but I absolutely got sympathy, and there has to be a solution. And I'm going to vote. I'm not sure, because this is all a bit of a mess, I think, procedurally. So anyway, that's my contribution to debate, and I think the deputy's given us a lot to think about. But we do need to find a way of helping these people.
Sorry, Deputy Young, you appear to have frozen. Had you finished?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I finished with the comment, which I just repeat to say we do need to find a way of helping these people, even though the proposition is, I think, a bit of a mess, and I don't know how to vote because it's a very confusing.
Very well. Thank you very much, Deputy. Mr. Attorney, are you able now to offer the advice that you were cut off from offering?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I apologise for the poor connection, sir. So I was about to answer Deputy Morell's question, and before I do so, I should just state that I'm only advising on the basis of the papers as lodged. I haven't studied any of the underlying contractual documentation that relates to these particular properties. So in terms of potential legal liabilities of the states, the principal form of liability will be a contractual one. But in my view, there are some fundamental obstacles to a contractual liability established against the states in relation to these properties. The first is that, as I think Deputy Morell was alluding to, the form of buyer beware principle, and that is in Jersey property law, the standard form of contract includes what's known as a vis cachet clause or a tutelles clause, whereby the buyer agrees to take the property on the basis as it is, including its vis cachet, which are its hidden defects. So that would encompass both physical defects with the property and potential title defects as well. So that's the first obstacle to legal liability. The second is that, as I understand it, these flats will have changed hands, perhaps not all of them, but the majority will have changed hands at least once, perhaps more, since 1964 or 1965. So a form of contractual remedy there would be against the previous seller of the flats, who may not be the states. It may be a private individual. And on each of those transactions, there would have been a form of due diligence carried out on the property, which in recent years would have included the property questionnaire, whereby a seller of the property is obliged to give information about the property, which may include physical defects of the type which I understand is in issue here. And then the third significant legal obstacle would be the principle of prescription of claims, and that's basically that when time passes, that is, once a certain amount of time has passed, then claims become prescribed, so that they're no longer being able to be brought in law. And the reason for that is that there has to be a point in time where a person knows that they're free of claims, and it becomes difficult or possible to have a fair trial in relation to the particular claim, because, for example, the witnesses are dead or the documentation's all gone astray. So in this case, we're dealing with a property built in 1964, so it can be reasonably expected that most of the parties, such as the builder, the architect, the surveyor, will all be dead and unable to offer evidence that would assist the court in determining legal liability. And that would apply also to the other form of liability, would be tortious liability. That would be a claim in negligence against the architect or surveyor. But again, those people are likely to be dead, and the prescription period for a tortious claim is generally 3 years, unless you can establish certain principles that it was impossible for you to bring the claim. So I hope that assists Deputy Morell with his question, but I will answer further questions, of course, as members wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney. Next to speak, Deputy Pinnell.
Thank you, sir. I must admit to being a little perplexed as to why Deputy Tadier is suggesting that the states need to fund the cost of these repairs. Simplistically, if I were to purchase a car or house, it would be my responsibility to undertake the necessary surveys or checks before completing the transaction. The new asset would become my property on a bought as seen basis, and it would be highly unusual, if not impossible, for me to revert to the vendor and seek payment for future repairs several years or decades later. Members are hopefully clear on the Council of Ministers' views on the Deputy's amendment. I can only repeat those views. The Minister for Housing had bought a perfectly acceptable solution, which has already been received, this Assembly's agreement, and which Deputy Tadier had more than ample time to amend when it was originally presented. My main concern with the Deputy's amendment is one of financing. He highlights the well-publicised cost of approximately £1.25 million for these repairs, which he expects government to pay, and which at this present time is unfunded. In the debate on P19 2021, the Assembly approved a variation to the purpose and terms of the 99-year Leaseholders Fund to enable the monies from the fund to be used for the provision of loans. That fund does not have unlimited resources, and it does not contain the £1.25 million required by the Deputy's amendment. The current balance is approximately £760,000. I'm advised by Jersey Property Holdings that they do not have sufficient available budget remaining in 2021 to cover such significant costs. This leaves only two solutions. A provision for the cost of the repairs could be included within Government Plan 2022 to 25, which will ultimately be approved by this Assembly. Or I could try and identify unallocated funds in a general reserve which can be utilised. The issue with the former solution is one of timing, as it will create a further period of uncertainty for the property owners, and there is no guarantee that the Assembly will approve the allocation of funds. The latter solution presents a more difficult scenario, as given the ongoing uncertainty presented by the COVID pandemic and government's ongoing support to islanders and their businesses, I do not foresee that there will be sufficient funds available for me to allocate in good conscience to this scheme. Little clarification on, in addition to the Attorney General, the terms of the leases are very clear. The 99-year leases meet all costs. No annual rental is paid. The 99-year terms were sold in 1964 for £2,600. The provision of a loan scheme remains the most sensible solution for residents who are unable to access or afford commercial loans or fund the cost of the repairs from their own resources. The use of public money to fund these repairs when there is no clear legal liability on the states to cover these costs sets a dangerous precedent for the future and the potential for unquantifiable expenditure in the years ahead.
If you could take the matter up.
For all the reasons I have outlined, I urge members to reject the Deputy's amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. And I think Deputy Young made some good comments, but this is a mess. So we had a loan scheme put to the states that had been worked on for quite a while, presented by Deputy Labby, and he said at the time this is because some owners can't afford the commercial loan, and we're trying to be helpful, and they're actually to the point now where they can't even get building insurance because of the balconies. So it was very, very important that that loan went through and people were able to use it. Somebody, Deputy Tadia, hadn't heard too much about it, and then straight away, or a few weeks later, just before he met with the Housing Minister, he put in a rescindment motion. Then obviously realised this helped nobody because there'd be no further forward. The people still couldn't get the loan from if they couldn't get a commercial loan, and there was no money. So then we have an amendment, which is what I'm probably talking to today, to find 1.2 million of other taxpayers' money to help out 96 flat owners. Now, in his own proposition and his speech, the deputy said 96 flats. Some of those owners would not even be able to go in the scheme because it's means tested. So it's means tested to a point, meaning they're either got quite a good income or X of savings, etc., etc. But the other people, depending on the size of the flat, 1 or 2 bedroom, could be paying between £10 to £100 a month. Now, the deputy also said, sir, that you know, these are some of the poorest places on the island, but they like living there. Well, haven't they accrued a nice capital asset? There's been people paying rent since the 60s, longer and longer, more and more rent. They don't even own part of a balcony, sir, and they never likely are to, and they've never got any capital. They won't have a sale to pass on a deposit to their children. And I wrote down as well, sir, buyer beware, but most of these are not even the buyers. These are buyers off of the buyers. And sometimes I think, as the attorneys just explained, your liability goes less and less once it's been sold once, maybe twice, but it's always on you to do the proper surveys, structural and otherwise. So I understand that, you know, that the deputy wants to help. The loan did help. It helped the people who couldn't get the commercial loan. The Deputy Labby of Housing has lodged, or is in the process lodging, extending it from 10 to 15 years, so those monies will be a lot less. But at the same time, you've got people there who possibly can't get, as I say, which is even much more worry if you cannot get your building insured, because anything happens, you've got no comeback. Your nice capital is then it's rubber or something, and you just got no comeback because you've got no insurance. I really think that today we have to throw this out. I'm not rescinding the good scheme that Deputy Labby, which I think he had inherited from the former housing minister. This wasn't put together overnight. It was, how can we help? And I just say to people, states members, I'll end on this, sir. Deputy Taddeo says we could be setting a precedent. We have sold houses, little bits of houses on and off from the 60s. But in the late, I think it was around 2008-9, housing itself passed, you can buy your own home. Some sitting tenants, if some sitting tenants couldn't buy the house that was being sold, they offered to move and they sold it to another tenant. Are we 100% sure they were all, everything checked? Because we could, this 1.2 million could come back and absolutely bite us. Not that we have got the 1.2 million, as the Treasury Minister pointed out. I think the loan scheme, especially with the 5-year extension, is a very, very feasible, easy scheme. And I suppose the housing minister, if he did want to look at not making it means tested, so everybody could go into it, that's the only other possibility. But if it's being paid out of the 700,000 that the Treasury Minister says is in the leaseholder's pot, and there wouldn't be enough for 96 flats, again, that wouldn't work. So I really think it wasn't a mess, Deputy Young. It's been made a mess, and it was made a mess because somebody thought they'd rescind a loan, and then somebody realised, well, that would be an even worse decision. So I know what I do. I'll get the taxpayer to pay, and it really isn't down to the taxpayer to pay this. As I say, all these people have got a capital asset that I think the Treasury Minister said paid between 2,600 for, or even if they paid 10 or 15,000, which I know houses up the road sold for around the mid 60s to 70s, with property prices today, it is what it is. So they have a good capital asset and they bought it. It just happened to be bought off the states. And if they say morally we are accountable, I don't even think we are morally accountable. You sort of pays your money and you take your choice, and that's what I say, sir. I'm not voting for this, and I'm not voting for the rescindment either. The loan should stand, and the deputy be allowed to put his amendment and increase it to 15 years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Before we move on, Constable St Mary, obviously, thank you for your contribution to the Greffius Fund as your phone went off during the course of the hearing. Next to speak, Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. Yes, this started because I was aware of the problems with in fact, the occupants of the flats came to see me because of the problems with the balconies and the queries about the insurance and so forth. I mean, yes, I think Treasury have leaned over backwards with the amendments to, try and accommodate the occupants who are having problems. But originally, my main concern was that the remediation should be done at a level which could be afforded by the occupiers of the flats. There was obviously a degree of urgency since some were wanting to sell their flats, and there was the question of the insurance. I did wonder whether, like the shared equity schemes, any outstanding balances in case of anything happening to the occupants, that balance should be available on sale or on death. I think a major lesson to be learned, and something that, if the states are selling property, it should be a very strong recommendation by the states. The lesson is that the purchaser must have their own survey and should not rely on the seller's survey. I mean, this is, perhaps the purchasers were a bit naive, but it's they shouldn't have relied on the survey by the states. And in this case, most of the purchasers, actually relied on the survey by the sellers. The states have been making every effort to assist with the amendments, and I think we need to take a step back before rushing in with a rescindment. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Senator. Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. The Kennedy Park flats were built over half a century ago, best part of 60 years. Normally, where a contractual relationship exists between a developer and the purchaser, a claim against the developer can be made for a period of up to 10 years. In the case of Kennedy Park flats, this period has long since passed. The apartments were built in 1964, and it's now virtually impossible to determine what led to the balconies being built with beams rather than in situ concrete. It has not been possible to locate any structural engineer's detailed drawings or any contact records of decisions made by design team or contractor. Therefore, it is impossible to make assumptions about what happened at the time and who was responsible. It must be recognized that buildings deteriorate and components end up failing through time. It is not clear that the use of the beams for the balconies over is the only factor in the defects seen at present. Age is also a factor. Members should note that the current owners of the flats are not the original purchasers. The original purchasers could said to have links to the government as the provider of the apartments in the 1960s, but subsequent purchasers acquired the flats under normal market conditions, taking a view on the level of due diligence undertaken at the time of purchase. So in response to Deputy's amendments and amendments to the amendments, Jersey Property Holdings did not build the Kennedy Park flats, and therefore the proposition that JPH should pay the cost is unreasonable. If members decide to approve the Deputy's amended proposition, JPH does not have the budget to pay for these repairs. So the low offer of low interest loans is intended to assist the owners who would have difficulty paying for the repairs. I commend the Treasury Minister for introducing the loan scheme, as I believe this to be a fair resolution. Simply paying for the repairs using public money for the reasons stated would not be an appropriate use of the public money and risk setting a harmful precedent for any defect arising on any residential unit built by government. I will end by this important point, and I urge members to reject both the proposition and the amendment to the proposition. I'll just make a point of the leaseholders statement on the leaseholders and the flats reverting to public ownership at the end of the 99-year term in 2063. Any leaseholder can convert to co-ownership at quite a modest cost, and it was a very fair cost when first offered in 2010. The terms of the lease are very clear. The 99-year leases all meet its costs. Same as any long lease, no annual rental is paid, and the 99-year terms were sold in 1964 for £2,600. As pointed out by previous speakers, sir, it's a very modest cost in the whole scheme of things to upgrade the balconies. Obviously, public safety is paramount, and all departments, Treasury, Housing, and indeed Jersey Property Holdings have done all they can to assist people in these flats. So it's I also recommend that members reject both parts of this amendment, sir, and support P71, which I believe the Housing Minister is bringing shortly, to extend the period of loans from 10 to 15 years. Thank you, sir.
Very much. On a point of order, Deputy Tadia.
So I hope it's a point of order because it relates to something the Minister said which is not factual and therefore might be inadvertently misleading, sir. He referred to.
I mean, I'm not sure that's a point of order. I think because that would require the chair to rule on whether or not, in fact, there was an error made, and that wouldn't be possible, I don't think. Could it be possibly a point of clarification that you're asking the minister to give of his speech?
We can do it that way if it's easier and if the minister agrees.
You give way for a point of clarification, Minister.
Absolutely, sir.
I just noted that the minister referred to my amendment to the amendment, and I can't comment on why he would do that, but clearly there's only one amendment and there's one proposition. Would he clarify that that's the case and he misspoke?
I was actually referring to the deputy's amendment to his own amendment, where it basically it says that property holding should pay. So it was the deputy's amendment to his own amendment I was referring to.
Well, I think that's where the confusion lies, Deputy Lewis, because of course there is no amendment to the amendment. Deputy Taddier's proposition is a standalone proposition, and there is one amendment to it. So what you probably meant to say was his amendment to the proposition. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Does that assist, Deputy Taddier?
Thank you.
Very well. Deputy Labby.
Thank you, sir. And here we are again, and this debate is already getting repetitive. So I just want to speak very briefly, just to the two options before us today to rescind the loan scheme and go back to square one. Deputy Martin is absolutely right. That would have implications, and don't forget, some of the residents of these flats are in limbo. They can't sell them at the moment. There is the insurer is hanging on, but it would be very dangerous if the insurer decided to pull out, and there is a risk of the contractor who's agreed to do this work. I think we could do it a year or two ago, might throw in the towel as well. So there would be a re-tendering process, and we probably can all guess how that would end up. So it is time critical. So I think a rescindment is not a good idea at all. On asking the taxpayer to foot the 1.2 million bill, that's a very clear option for members, and one of conscience, I think, the individual conscience. I personally can't justify that in my conscience because I don't think it's an appropriate use of taxpayers' money. With the greatest respect to the Lekenove residents, I'm sorry, but I don't. So I personally am going to reject that. Look, Deputy Taddier is doing his job as a constituency representative. I've got no beef with him at all, and I understand that, but I can't accept it. And then there is a third option, of course, coming down the line because of my proposition to add a 15-year repayment option to the 10-year option that is already there. Now that was a something that I got agreed with from all the St. Brelard representatives who I called to a meeting a couple of weeks back, and that was one thing that we all thought was a good idea, and that I pressed ahead with, fully expecting that proposition might attract amendments, and I think Deputy Taddier has made a good point about perhaps a relaxation of the conditions in terms of the testing for the loans, and he's very welcome to amend my proposition, my new proposition, and anyone else to see if we can get to something that is agreeable. The reason why I even went down this road after having a unanimous decision on the loan scheme was that Deputy Taddier was alerting me to cases of serious hardship. We don't want to see anybody in that sort of situation. I'm not going to talk anymore. I think those are the options before us. I think we can, let's say, dispose of this one fairly quickly, and we'll keep working on the loan scheme and around my new proposition. And I would hope that the states might agree to take it early so we can get this done before the summer recess. Thank you, sir.
Much, Deputy. Constable St Mary, you indicated by switching your light on you'd like to speak. Of course, we are now doing all those indications in the chat, but I will call you, as you have given an indication you'd like to speak, but could I remind you in the future to participate through the chat so other members know you've asked to speak?
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that.
No, sorry.
Sir, I feel very sorry for the property owners. They bought in good faith. Maybe the properties have changed hands since. These flats were built in the mid-60s. There were architects, structural engineers, builders who have long since gone, as these were basically states-provided housing built by Parkinson Builders Limited, a UK company who was brought in for that purpose. Above all, we had our state's planning and building inspectors, so we have 5 independent checks. It appears that none of them did any checks. At times, faults do not get picked up even by surveyors during property sales. This may be a simple waterproofing solution, or it may be structural and more serious. I believe this to be mostly a moral issue and believe the states to be at fault and should certainly help these people in some way. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Constable and Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I note, as was mentioned just now by the Comptroller St Mary, that the situation with low-cost properties built by the Sir Lindsay Parkinson Building Company, now incidentally defunct, haven't been without precedent of defects of a similar nature of what we are experiencing here, particularly with regard to steel concrete encased beams. The present situation, sir, is far from satisfactory in that attempts have been made to resolve it over the last 10 years without result. My panel's comment on comment paper to P19 summed up the evidence we had at that time. The existing status of the structures dictates that it's difficult to get the properties properly insured. The ability to resell them is compromised, as is their value, unless the work is done. Something has to happen. Notwithstanding that, sir, I fully sympathise with the residents affected and the concerns that have been given to them. It's become clear since the adoption of P19 that the variation of type of ownership is significant, and that certainly wasn't clear at the time. Consequently, circumstances are much and varied, as has been explained by others. There are some who are still leaseholders and others who may be tenants. So there will be an inevitable increase in rental, it seems to me, if landlords or freeholders' costs increase. It has to go down the line. There will be some who may have purchased at a reduced price as a result of the perceived defects. Should they receive a payout from or an assisted loan from the government? I'm not sure. It mustn't be overlooked, sir, that those who've transacted will have had the opportunity to have their properties surveyed, and like everyone else, and those that didn't, maybe should be talking to their legal representatives and surveyors, as once again has been mentioned earlier. The properties will, it seem to me, sir, increase in value. So it is for the property freeholders to elect whether to recoup their costs for tenants or to wait until the properties sell at a later date. It may be the case, sir, that in situations where the governments are still freeholders, that may well be the best course of action, as the expenditure will be recouped in the fullness of time. There is a question from some residents which asks what the state's pot of money or leaseholder fund has accumulated, and the Treasury Minister expanded on this earlier. But sir, could it be used to contribute to some of the cost of the remedial work? It is clear, sir, that there is a risk of setting a legal precedent by adopting the proposition, and I find this of great concern. In conclusion, sir, I do find it difficult to balance the needs of property leasehold or flying freeholders against those of the public of the island, who one could argue will be disadvantaged if we were to follow the Deputy's proposition. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Pallett.
Yes, sir. Just briefly, because I think the argument's been well put. I think in regards to precedent set, or potentially that could be set, and a lot of the issues in regards to this. I don't want to lengthen this debate any longer than it has to be. But Deputy Ted, you mentioned that that myself and Deputy Truscott discussed this matter with him, and he's quite right that we did, and we did go to a public meeting with the residents to hear what they had to say. But I think in regards to the amendment, I just want to be clear that I neither encouraged or supported bringing this amendment because, as I said to Deputy Ted, when we discussed this, I did feel that it was setting a precedent. I got some independent legal advice myself in regards to property purchase, and it was clear that there was a risk of further liability for the states if we went down this route. So I didn't feel it was the right route to go. There was the minister, the housing minister, I think, within his report when I think it was P19, did mention around some moral responsibility of the states in regards to work that was carried out some 50 plus years ago. And I'd just be interested to know whether he took any legal advice before he made that comment, because I think it has opened the door for, and I don't blame Deputy Teddy for taking this route, because many will feel that states did have a moral, or do have a moral responsibility to do something here. But I think it also opened the door, I think, for this particular amendment. I think we do have a moral duty to assist the residents, but a lot of the residents are in I think they're all in a different position. I think there's a smaller number that clearly do need some support if they are going to take a loan out. And I want to speak on that when we talk about the rescindment proposition, but they are all in a different position. I think there is a moral responsibility to help those that are in a less fortunate position. In saying that, there are some that I think quite happy to get on and pay the amount up front, and just to get the work done, because I think many of the residents clearly are concerned that one is, yes, they can't get insurance, but they are putting their properties unduly at risk. But I think the main issue is around precedent, and I think allowing the state, or if the states were to agree this, how many potential can of worms there are lurking in the background with others that may feel that they've taken on a property with hidden defects that they now feel the state should pay for, is concerning to me, and I'm sure it's concerning to other members. So I can't support this amendment, but I do want to speak when we come to the rescindment notice and about loans, because I think there is a clear need for loans to be offered to residents, and those loans need to be as flexible and as open as possible. But I'll speak on that later. I can't, like I say, I can't support this amendment as it currently stands.
Deputy Teddy, you have a point of clarification. Is that a point of clarification of the previous speaker?
Yes.
Senator, do you give way for a point of clarification?
I'll help the deputy if I can, sir.
I mean, I'm trying to be mutually helpful. So the senator said that he did want to speak when it came to the rescindment. I gave an indication earlier that if this amendment falls, I would look to withdraw the main proposition. So I just wanted to ask if the senator hasn't finished speaking. I mean, it's obviously up to the Assembly whether I can do that, but well,
I'm afraid that's not a point of clarification, but it may be a helpful interjection.
Thank you.
Although helpful interjection is not an animal known to standing orders, so
so can I ask for clarification from the
I won't
chair?
take this, but do you wish to clarify, Senator, whether you finished speaking in the light of the question raised to you by Deputy Taddeo?
Well, so no, I won't, but I won't carry on for very long. I'll probably just pick up a couple of points and then finish speaking and not speak if there is a debate on the rescindment.
Sorry, you wish to carry on speaking?
I'll carry on very briefly.
Yes,
sir.
well, then your speech is not ended. Carry on, please.
Thank you. In regards to options, I think there are various options open to the residents. Interest only is one that I know we spoke to the minister about, and it's always been spoken to residents. That won't appeal to a lot, but it may appeal to some of those in later life that feel that if the states are agreeable, that they could pay interest only till the point at which the property is sold. Another option, and I know it's one that a lot of people now use in terms of releasing capital on their property is an equity release, and maybe some may feel that they much prefer to pay the sum out front and just have take an equity release out, which will be repaid on the property being sold. Again, I don't think it's not all 96 owners that are going to need a loan. There's a much smaller number than that are going to need it. But I do feel, and I hope the minister will be as flexible as possible in what he can offer the residents, because there are some that are desperately concerned about being able to pay a loan, and I think we do need to try to talk them through and help them. And I know the minister is doing that. He's made it quite clear that he's got members of staff that will talk the residents through what is available and make it as easy as possible. But we do need to do that. We do have a moral duty to assist, but like I say, I don't think we've got a moral duty to put right any mistakes that were made, if they were mistakes, because building standards have changed over the years, and as ministers have said, it may be an issue that didn't really come to light or wasn't even a concern at the time. And I for one I'm sure many of us have taken on property and found hidden nightmares that we've had to put right. And but in this particular case, I think there is an opportunity to help those that are least able to help themselves. But I think that needs to be done through a flexible loan scheme that is as open as possible for residents to be able to take on, and as affordable as possible for those that can least afford it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's always an interesting debate when we get into this use of taxpayers' money, which is where it seems to me there's a group, particularly in government, and I say a group in government, that is wanting to always focus any debates that look to help islanders out with a cost into this, or it's a misuse of taxpayers' money idea. At the same time, that huge amounts of taxpayers' money is being directed into other projects with it seems no care and attention at all. And so I remind members that this is about 96 real people's lives, 96 real people's homes. And what the Deputy Taddy is trying to do here is actually simplify a solution. And what we've had is arguments regards, well, I think it was said that the proposition was a mess. So I think what's happening is that the loan scheme is a bit of a mess, because it has a clause in it about if you have any savings whatsoever, and £10,000 of savings is not a vast amount for anybody who has a home and is trying to look to the future. And so what it seems to do is that it takes this notion that whenever there is something that needs money being spent on it, we will look at individuals and say, look, we're quite happy as a government to put you in debt. We're happy to offer you a loan, but you'll be in debt and you'll pay interest on it, and we'll get the essential work done, but you'll be responsible for it because of a really complicated and backdated problem that came from the build that you may not have known about, and actually you may have been a victim to some extent to these convoluted system that we have of building control. So what concerns me is that we're about to spend huge amounts of money on things like Cyril Mark on the house, Cyril Mark on for states building with a contract which is going to cost the states vast amounts of money, and the hospital, it seems to be eating up money like there's no tomorrow. And you're taking money away from builds all over the place to put about £20 million in this year alone just to keep it going because of what's called a cash flow problem. So there is a fund which has got around 700 and something million pounds. So the figure of 1.25 million, really there is a fund to cover the vast majority of that. So we're talking about another £500,000, which seems to be able to be found for all sorts of things from this government, but not for this project. So there is a moral responsibility, and what this moral responsibility leads to is us saying we can solve this problem very quickly with money that's already there and a small amount of money that would need to be added to the fund. And in doing that, it means that 96 people would have a problem in their homes solved by government that were created by government builders in the beginning. And so it seems to me that this is the simplest solution. And I ask members to move away from this culture of we can't use taxpayers' money for this when it suits government, when it suits a group in government that seems to be being formed. But we can use it for other huge projects when it suits. So this is a simple solution. I thank Deputy Tadier, and I think the residents of the flats would be very pleased with what Deputy Tadier is trying to do here. And I ask members to support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Truscott.
Yes, thank you, sir. And obviously, being the one of the other district deputies, I'm happy to contribute to this debate. It wasn't until after the P19 was passed in the Assembly that Deputy Tadier and I actually started getting any kind of reps from anyone regarding the flats and the problem that the flats were experiencing. But it soon came to pass that there was obviously serious concerns around the whole thing. And it is rather unfortunate because, you know, the proposition from the Minister was lodged in good time. We had a full scrutiny of the proposition, and I assure members that the Minister and his officers was well grilled by the scrutiny team. And we put a paper forward before the debate. So everything was done in order. And what I thought was a good result. And I do, to a degree, you know, I'm still quite happy with how things stand. So I remember, and you probably do too, knowing that you're a Sombrero boy, remember the flats actually being built. And that does age me. I was 6 at the time, but I do remember them actually being built. So there we go. And I do remember piles of concrete beams, strangely enough. It's one of those weird things that stay with you, but there we go. And I have a great deal of sympathy with the residents. Nobody, no matter what your means are, wants an unexpected bill to arrive on your doorstep. And we are talking of a significant amount of money, anywhere between £6,000 and £14,000, I think, are the figures quoted, depending on the size of the flat that you have. And it's, you know, as you say, nobody wants that type of, you know, liability just turn up, and it's, you know, unexpectedly. And it is unfortunate, but I can't help thinking and going back to the fact, and it's the time issue that's involved here. We're talking the best part of 60 years. I'm 62, going on 63 this year. And you know, even I, sir, starting to break down in certain parts. And I also have a house that was built in, own a house that was built in 1958. And I do know that the roof will very shortly need a significant amount of work done on it in the region of £10,000 to £15,000. but I expect that as an owner of a property and a property of this age. And I do appreciate that if you don't maintain your properties, then, you know, problems with insurance, problems get bigger going forward because, you know, leaks start happening if you don't sort your roof out, and it just escalates. So maintenance has got to be done. I was grateful for Com for presenting a paper, and I think Deputy Lewis actually read it pretty much verbatim. But in it, Deputy Tadier, we work very well together. We both care a lot for our constituents. As I say, it's good to work with him. He brings some very good things forward. It's just regarding the concrete beams, and the point was made, and I did do a little research on that, that perhaps this was the wrong thing to use. But even if poured concrete had been used at the time, the life expectancy of concrete is anywhere between 50 and 100 years, sometimes less, depending on the mix. So here we have flats that have now been in existence for 57 going on, well, 57 years. And yes, there is deterioration in the beams, and it is unfortunate, but it could have happened with concrete. Now, I walked around the estate a couple of times and looked up at all of the balconies, and I don't think there's one original balcony left with the balustrade that was there originally. I think there's been alterations over the years. Some of the flats have turned the balconies into sunrooms. So it's a real mixture of what people have done. Now, I can't guarantee that when those balustrades were refixed, the seals were put in correctly. So, you know, there's a whole myriad of things that could have contributed to a deterioration in these beams. So, you know, just from the point of view of maintenance, of wear and tear, of the time involved that we're talking about here, I just find it hard to, you know, put the taxpayer, and that's everyone in the island, in a position to, you know, pay for this, where, you know, the properties were purchased originally for 2,600. I've got 2,750 in my notes, now worth in probably around about £400,000 in total. I was pleased to hear the Housing Minister, Sir, propose, well, he's bringing P71, which is great, extending it, which we all agreed as collectively as that was Deputy Tedier's, Senator Pallett and myself. But he did say, and I think this is where we can make a real difference for the residents, is that we could bring some amendments to P71 to actually encompass any things that have been missed in the original incarnation of P19. So I think that's a good opportunity for all three of us, or including Senator, or four of us, including Senator Ferguson, should she wish to. But I personally, sir, I can't, just to the length of time that's involved here, I cannot support Deputy Teddier as much as I'd like to. We both got our residents or our constituents at heart, but I'm sure we can come up with a good resolution going forward. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy St. Peter.
Thank you, sir. I feel the Housing Minister is it's not been really appreciated for what he is doing here. We've heard the arguments. I don't want to cut to the chase, the buyer beware arguments. We know that purchasers should have surveys. If not, their conveyancing lawyers should recommend them to do so. We know that these flats have changed hands many, many times, and therefore, you know, the onus and responsibility has to remain with the owners. And in the normal commercial world, if these weren't built by the state, what would we actually be doing? It really would be the buyer beware. So therefore, I think this offer to listen very carefully to the needs of those particular owners, and they are owners, to listen very carefully to the needs of those owners and put together some financial loan scheme in order for them to bring their properties back into good order, and bring them back into good order enables them to be insured. And also, if should they choose to do so, realise their asset, sell their home, hopefully for an alternative home, at a very significant capital appreciation. I think we ought to put it in a little bit more perspective. There are 96 flats there, and of which my research tells me that the proposers notes that there are 25 on 99-year leases. I've checked the database of Jersey Property Holdings, and there are 27 flying freeholds owned by Jersey Property Holdings, which basically means, I'm assuming that means those are the 27 that are on the long leases, or the 50, 60 years left of the lease. That means 69 of them are on flying freeholds, where they own their properties effectively in entirety. So what happens if we were to ask Jersey Property Holdings to pay for this remediation work? The benefit will surely then be to the owners of these particular properties. So should they choose to sell, what would be the additional capital appreciation of these works having been carried out? This is a very commercial situation, and I understand the moral issue, because that's what the housing minister has brought to the table in order to help them out financially. I'm not understanding this. I really would just think we ought to do what we can to ask this to go away, vote against it, bring forward E71, try and have it debated before the summer recess, in order to ensure, as Deputy Labby says, we can still maintain the quotes from the contractors, and we can close this matter out very quickly. And should there be any other amendments to, shall we say, soften the blow to these 96 owners that come forward, I will listen to them greatly, because we have to be sympathetic, but ultimately it is a commercial situation, and the states of Jersey, the islanders of Jersey, should not be paying for 96 individuals of commercially owned properties. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak on the amendment? Then I close the debate and call on Deputy Tadier to respond.
Sir, thank you. Can I thank, first of all, those members who have spoken, whether it's for or against, or perhaps somewhere in the middle. I know that it's perhaps an unusual proposition in the sense that it's quite a localised issue, but I think it's one that it hasn't stopped members engaging on it, because they realise that there are points of principle here, I think. I'll start with the last speaker whilst it's still in my mind, and the message I got from the Assistant Minister was, first of all, let's try and close this matter as soon as we can. I welcome the idea that there will be a resolution, but I also think there was an undertone that, you know, this is a problem, let's try and get rid of it. And I think there's been a perception, I think, amongst the residents that the flats have always been a bit of an inconvenience, that they were on 99-year leases, and that there was a suggestion that property holdings just want to get rid of the liability. And I think, just to go back a couple of steps further, we've got to remember why the 99-year leases were put in place in the first place. They were a type of affordable housing scheme for people who couldn't necessarily buy outright, and it's clearly changed from what it was meant to be. But there aren't 96 owners there who are going to be better off commercially. There are 25 who are only leaseholders. They live in properties that they've prepaid for, that they might be paying mortgages on, that they don't own, and that and it's not simply the case that they can, if they want to, transfer these to flying freeholds, because they've told me in many cases they simply don't have the money to pay for that. And these sums, it's easy for us to try and trivialise the sums, but we've got to realise that, you know, not everybody has money lying around, and not everyone can secure even a small loan to be able to buy the freeholds. And that's certainly the story that I've heard over and over again when I've sat down and listened to these individuals. The other point is that somehow they're going to be financially better off. So even if we did give them the money, even if we agreed today that we are going to pay for the repairs outright, these people are no better off than the properties being built properly in the first place. Because if the properties had been built properly, they wouldn't have to have this work done, which they're being asked to pay for. And they would therefore have that £10,000, £12,000, £16,000 in some cases, and the interest, that they would have that in their bank if only the properties had been built properly. And it goes back to the point that this is a moral argument, that the states were the ones in the wrong. And there's already been an attempt at a revisionist history, but thankfully we've got it, you know, that there may be the idea that we've heard that if the states was in the wrong, but it's in black and white. It's in the minister's very own proposition that he brought in P19, and I'll read that again just to remind ourselves, and I put it in bold in my report to the amendment. He said it was explained that as the fault was resultant of the original construction method, it was felt that a moral duty existed to provide a means of assistance. That's the current minister's own words. He says later on the balconies required certain amount of repairs arising from a problem with the original construction method. And I know Senator Pallett said that talked about the fact that there were different construction methods back then, and that they maybe we wouldn't have known about the issues that we do today. But the minister again said that it's considered that even in the 1960s, the expertise of the architect, engineer and contractor should have highlighted the risks and swayed the decision away from using such beams on the balconies. So we've been presented by some revisionist history in the space of a couple of months here, that maybe the states weren't responsible. And that's always how it starts when you want to try and get rid of your moral liability. You say, well, maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe it's somebody else's fault, and maybe that we shouldn't pay for it. And as I said, the minister said that the states should assist with the repairs because, verbatim, the flats were built with a fundamental defect that ought to have reasonably been picked up and have been reasonably avoided. So a fundamental defect that ought to have been reasonably avoided. So the case is clear here. The states were liable. It was their mistake. They should never have been built in this condition. And as a result, the owners, whether they own outright, whether or not they rent their flats out, or whether or not, in fact, they're leaseholders and they don't own their flats, we can't start making these moral judgments about whether people are in quite wealthy situations and they're somehow profiting from us if we give them either a loan or we pay for the work outright. This is about who created the problem and who should be fixing the problem. And that responsibility, the moral responsibility, has been fully acknowledged in the minister's report. In a way, that wouldn't be the case if another matter came to the states. And I think therein lies the problem. I'll try not to keep members too long, but there are a few other points that need to be raised. There was also an attempt to make this look like a mess. So a few members started with, I think, Deputy Young, Deputy Martin and others saying this is a complete mess. But the proposition and the amendment are very simple. It talks about a rescindment, i.e. the loan scheme isn't what it should be. And the reason I put the amendment, the proposition in, was because the minister said, look, in order for me to make changes to this, it has to come back to the states. At that point, there was no suggestion of the minister coming back. So I thought, OK, well, let's at least get the ball rolling. If the loan scheme needs to be changed, then let's rescind it. In the meantime, Minister, as the conversation went, you can bring something back to the Assembly. And what did actually happen is that, yeah, he did bring something back to the Assembly. When was it lodged? It was lodged on Monday at the beginning of the week, a day before we started sitting, to say, let's have a 15-year period rather than a 10-year period. No comments paper. And of course, he's done that presumably because having a proposition on the table focuses the mind. That's something I've learned over the last 12 years. It's not because people are not honourable. It's just that if you've got a proposition, then it means that you will have to respond to it from a governmental point of view at a certain point. And I suspect that it wouldn't have been the case that we would have had these this one change, with the potential now for further amendments if this isn't successful today, because you have to put something on the table, otherwise you're not taken seriously by government. And that's the reality of the situation. I also expected fully to have this argument about, oh, we can't really justify this is taxpayers' money. But I do refer to the comments again in my conclusion, is that this is money that the leaseholders and the owners of these flats have paid to Treasury many times over. So or rather, the money that's gone into Treasury far exceeds any money that I'm asking the Treasury to give. And it's, of course, property holdings never have any money, do they? They never have money, but that's why the Treasury needs to give them money to pay for these repairs. There was a question, of course, about why there wasn't a structure, why the structural survey never picked this up. And you've got to question why it wasn't picked up previously when the states signed it off. This is something which hasn't yet been answered. So I'm going to leave the comments there. Safe to say that I do hope that members will accept that there's a moral responsibility here, and that it's an important imperative. And I think it's one that we try and teach our children and young people, is that if you make a mistake, you hold your hands up and you try and rectify the mistake. It doesn't matter if that mistake occurred recently or if it occurred a long time in the past. If it's something which is flagged up to you only recently, and this issue was only flagged up upon a recent survey, a maintenance inspection, that it occurred, then I think the States has a different level of responsibility and duty of care to those who bought off them in good faith, sir. Now, if this doesn't go through today, sir, then I do ask the Minister to seriously consider opening up the loan scheme, removing the means testing. There's absolutely no reason not to have means testing here for a loan. There's no reason to have means testing on a loan, which is a relatively small value, but hugely important to those individuals who would be receiving it, who are not in a position to be able to cough up that money themselves. And also to look at completely getting rid of the interest, or setting it at a notional 0.5%. And I think there also needs to be an argument made for the fact that leaseholders are in a completely different position to flying freeholders. I've consistently tried to bring this as a simple proposition. It might be one that members find unpalatable because they don't like the price tag that's associated with it. That's a real price tag, because that's what we're asking the residents of these faultily built flats to pay for. But it's a simple proposition, and I could have gone down a more convoluted route and say, well, actually, we should pay half of it. We should pay for the entirety of those on a leasehold. But I certainly didn't want to be the one pitting leaseholders against flying freeholders, and then maybe saying if they've got tenants in their flats, they should not get the money. And of course, is it the tenants who will ultimately pick up the bill for this? You know, that's a perversity if that is the case. We're often told that when there are expenses to landlords, that automatically get paid passed on to the tenants. Well, are the tenants going to actually be paying more rent here because the states won't pay for something which is their moral responsibility? So the landlords are going to have to recoup their costs from that. Who knows? These are all the consequences. But my proposition is fundamentally simple, and I do ask members to support it. And I do thank members for the time they've taken with this. And I commit, and I recognise there are differences of opinion on this, but I do thank in particular my local colleagues, Deputy Truscott, Senator Pallett, Senator Ferguson and Constable Jackson, as well as those who have worked from a governmental point of view on this, for their time. We might have arrived at different positions. I hope that they'll still change their mind and support this, but I do look forward to working with them to find a solution to this issue if it isn't the one on the table today, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy. I would ask the greffier to place a voting link into the chat. The vote is on whether or not the deputy's proposition can be taken as amended. That's a vote on the amendment. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the amendment has been defeated. 12 votes pour, 27 votes contre, no abstentions in the link, and a further 1 vote pour in the chat.
Could we have the pour and contre, please, sir?
Yes.
Those members who voted for using the link: Deputy Alves, Senator Mezek, Deputy Ward, Deputy Pamplin, Deputy Wickenden, Deputy Taddier, Deputy Higgins, Deputy Southern, Constable of St Martin, Deputy Ash, the Deputy of St John, Deputy Lewis, and I think in the chat it was the Constable of St Mary. Those voting contra were Senator Lafondre, Senator Valois, the Deputy of St Martin, Constable of St John, Deputy Aye, Deputy Pennell, Deputy Martin, the Constable of Trinity, Deputy Labby, Senator Ferguson, Deputy Truscott, Deputy Young, Deputy of Grouville, Deputy of St Peter, Deputy Gardner, Constable of St Helier, Deputy Guida, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy Morel, Senator Pallett, Senator Farnham, Deputy of St Juan, sorry, pardon, the Constable of St Juan, Deputy Doublé, the Constable of St Peter, the Deputy of St Juan, the Constable of Grouville, and the Deputy of Trinity.
Yes, well, we now resume a debate on the main proposition unamended. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition unamended?
Sir, can I just ask a point of order? I'd given an indication that I'd like to withdraw the proposition, and I don't know if now is the right time to do it, and if the Assembly would give me leave to do that.
Yes, you're quite right, Deputy. You do require the leave of the Assembly to withdraw the proposition, but you are entitled to ask the Assembly for its leave to withdraw the proposition now, if that's what you wish to do.
Thank you, sir. It seems the appropriate time to do it before anyone speaks.
Very well. Well, does any member object and wish to have a vote as to whether or not the Deputy is given leave to withdraw the proposition? Could you indicate in the chat, please? If so, we'll have a proper debate on it. I'm sorry, Deputy Martin, you've simply said no. Is that you do not agree that the Deputy can withdraw, or that you don't want to speak about it?
I put on to speak to ask, was the Deputy going to withdraw? And then you said, did anyone have any opposition to the Deputy withdrawing? So I thought I put no.
Okay.
Is that clear, sir? Sorry.
I think that's clear. Thank you very much. Very well. Well, I've not heard anyone indicating that they wish to oppose the deputy's desire to withdraw. Therefore, Deputy, you have the you're entitled to withdraw the proposition, and the proposition is now withdrawn.
Thank you
very much. Just to inform members, we've received notice from Deputy Wickenden that he's resigned from the Jersey Police Authority. I bring that to the state's attention, as of course he was a state's appointee to that post.
Works fine. Still haven't got the screen fixed there. Thank you.
You need to look at this.
We're going to have a look at. We'll have a look at them, shall we?
Well, no, but only if.
Then move on to the last proposition for debate for this season, which is the draft COVID-19 election of Durats Jersey regulations, P60, which has been lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services. And if the graphier is ready, I'll ask him to read the citation.
Draft COVID-19 election of Durats Jersey regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 2 of the COVID-19 Enabling Provisions Jersey Law 2020.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. These regulations are brought under our emergency COVID time-limited legislation and would allow an election for the office of Jurat to be held safely during the current pandemic. One of our 12 Jurats retired earlier this month, and under normal circumstances, the election of a replacement would be carried out by a meeting of the Electoral College called in accordance with the Royal Court law. Under that law, where 2 or more candidates for the office have been nominated, the college must be summoned within a specified time frame. The average attendance at an Electoral College meeting is around 150. And a minimum of 40 are required to form a quorum. However, there are over 500 members in total, being all advocates, solicitors, states members, and existing Jurats, all of whom are entitled to attend and vote at the meeting. Currently, an Electoral College meeting would be within the guidelines on gatherings. However, there is a concern that should the situation change, the bailiff may find that he cannot meet the requirements of the law without breaching guidelines, which would clearly not reflect well on the government or the justice system. And in addition, the physical constraints of the Royal Court would mean that a significant of the island's lawyers, a significant number of them, states members and judiciary would be sitting closely together in an indoor environment with members of the public who might wish to attend, and the meeting might go on for a considerable period of time. This, of course, poses a COVID risk, and the risk is that any cases appearing amongst attendees might result in disruption to the functioning of the courts and the government were those present at the college required to self-isolate. So to address these concerns, the regulations will simply provide flexibility with regard to how and when a meeting of the Electoral College could be held by offering 2 alternative methods of resolving the problem. Firstly, the requirement for the bailiff to notify members of the Electoral College of the vacancy within 28 days will be suspended. This will allow the bailiff to delay a meeting until such time as he can be sure that the guidelines permit it, the circumstances are safe, and it is likely that no changes will occur in the interim. I understand this is the preferred choice, as it would allow the normal processes to be followed with a minimum of added complexity. It does mean that the Royal Court may have to operate with less than the full complement of 12 Jurats for a time, but I have been advised that this is tolerable in the short term. Secondly, provision will be made for a meeting of the college to be carried out virtually, using similar infrastructure to that which underpins virtual meetings of this Assembly. I understand that that arrangement is thought to be very much the second choice. I have met with the bailiff and the Attorney General, and we have discussed the matter in detail. I've been assured that there is no possibility of any member of the college being excluded from voting due to some shortcomings in technology. If any problems with the virtual system were to emerge, including any members being unable to access the meeting or vote, the bailiff would be able to adjourn and delay the meeting until such time as either the technology could be brought into full working order or a physical meeting could be convened. Any virtual meeting would be open to public viewing in the same way that the public can observe the meetings of our Assembly. And therefore, sir, I propose the principles of these regulations. Thank you, sir.
These regulations seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? I don't believe any member wishes to speak on the principles, but my chat box has been obscured. Constable St John.
Thank you. Can the Minister confirm what alternatives have been looked at? I note that over 500 people were accommodated at Trinity recently in an area that the Royal Court has been using, and whether that has been considered. I know that he spoke about the solution similar to the Assembly is using, but I believe that the Assembly should actually be meeting in person and only those with underlying health issues joining us online. So could he clarify for us, please?
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, I will call the Minister to Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask the Minister, he may not be able to answer the question, but I see what we're doing here is amending the Royal Court Jersey Law 1948. Obviously, this is a very historic and long-standing arrangement. Isn't it time that this whole arrangement of these elections of jurates were reviewed? This really is now the 21st century, sir. And this is, you know, whatever people love tradition, isn't this time that we started to improve this change this arrangement, sir? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just remind the Assembly that the regulations are very narrowly drawn in relation to COVID-19 response, so it's not an opportunity for a broader debate about the election of jurats in normal circumstances. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I better turn my video off. I'm back in civvies. Sorry. That notwithstanding, sir, I think it is relevant to raise the fact that if we had a proper, modern, up-to-date way of appointing jurats, we wouldn't need to make these provisions for a highly modern digital function method to be used for a very anachronistic and feudal ancient way of electing these individuals. And I think the juxtaposition of the modern technology being used for a feudal tradition that has no place in the 21st century, not simply because it's traditional, but simply because it's highly inappropriate that the two groups of people you don't want to be anywhere near the appointment of magistrates are advocates and politicians, yet they're the only people that are allowed to elect jurats at all. So it's the people who are perhaps most conflicted because they have to serve before them in the Royal Court, or the fact that they're politicians, and there's a long-standing modern tradition that legislators and the judiciary should not be mixed. So I think it is relevant to say that why are we in a position to need to do that, albeit it's slightly peripheral. So I'm not sure how that leads me to vote on this, but we shouldn't even be in this situation today. We should have an appointments commission that appoints the right people for the job with the right experience to be judges of fact, as the Durats are, notwithstanding some of their other roles, which may or may not be in need of review. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, I will call the Minister to reply to the debate.
Thank you, sir. Dealing firstly with the question raised by the Connétable of St. John, the bailiff is free and would remain free if these regulations are passed to hold a meeting of the college either in the Royal Court itself or in other venues. The court has met recently in the RJA and HS building in Trinity, so that is clearly an option. The point of these regulations is that if passed, they will not require the bailiff to call a meeting within the 28 days of the vacancy if he considers that it is not safe to do so and that he cannot do so without a risk to public health. But when he feels that he is in a position to call that meeting safely, he can convene the college to the Royal Court or to any other venue that the Royal Court may sit in. As to the points made by Deputy Young and Deputy Tadier, I really don't feel this is a matter for the health portfolio. This is a very limited regulation arising out of the present rules around distancing and COVID-safe procedures. And this is to take out the existing system that we have. I'm not in a position to propose any changes, but we've got to work within the existing system, and this is what these regulations are doing. I hope that answers the question, sir, and I would seek the appel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In a moment, the greffier will place a link into the chat box. The vote will be on the principles of P60. And the link is available, so I invite members to cast their votes. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Principles have been adopted. 39 votes pour in the link. No votes contra, no abstentions, and an additional vote put in the chat. I'm not sure who is here from the Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy here, and we don't need to bring this in. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, there are two regulations. Will you take them on block?
Yes, I would like to, sir, and I think I've explained in my speech exactly what they cover, so I would like to go straight to a vote on, or straight to questions on them. Thank you, sir.
Regulation seconded. I hope the regulations are seconded.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So, any member wish to speak on the regulations? If no member wishes to speak, I will try this on a standing vote unless a member wishes to call for a recorded vote, but if any member wishes to object or to call for a recorded vote, please let me know in the chat, otherwise we'll take this as adopted on a standing vote. I don't see or hear any objections, so the regulations are adopted on a standing vote. Minister, do you want to proceed to third reading?
Yes, sir, if I may, and request, sir.
Regulations adopted in third reading. Seconded, sorry, jumped ahead myself.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any member wish to speak on third reading? No member wishes to speak. I would again move to a standing vote unless a member wishes to have a recorded vote. Any member wishes to have a recorded vote or to object? Deputy Young's requested a recorded vote, so I ask the greffier to place a link in the chat box for a vote on third reading. Links available, so I ask members to cast their votes. Full members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations have been adopted in third reading. 37 votes per, no votes contra, no abstentions, and 1 extra vote per in the chat. That concludes public business for this sit-in, so I will now invite Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. There's been one change to the arrangement of public business from what was listed on the consolidated order paper, and that is P65 Rent Control Tribunal and Register of Rents Re-establishment has been withdrawn. There was also an omission on the order paper, which is the Draft Road Traffic number 68 Jersey regulations. This isn't scheduled for debate on the 5th of October following the referral to scrutiny. There are a number of propositions listed for the next meeting in July, as well as an in-committee debate. Obviously, it's difficult to predict how long the meeting will last, but I would like to remind members that Wednesday, Thursday and Friday are all identified as continuation days if needed. So with that, sir, I propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings.
Thank you very much. Is the arrangement seconded? Does any member have any
Yes, sir.
points to make? Who is that? You're best to indicate in the chat. Is that the Constable St Martin?
Yes, no, I was just saying I seconded the arrangement of business.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the arrangement of public business? Deputy Wickenden.
Hi, thank you, sir. I was just wondering whether the chair of PPC would consider getting a view from members about maybe looking to stay later on some of the days to try and reduce the number of days that we could be in the sitting. Just going round and really asking to see if we could add an hour or two onto the end of the sitting and just work through that to try and reduce the kind of the amount of days that we're in the assembly. Just as an idea, obviously if states members don't want that, they will let the chair of PPC know, and that will be dealt with accordingly. But I just thought it would be worth investigating the option, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. I mean, it's only reacting to what's just been said, but surely the way to go if we're having to if we're likely to overrun with business piling up, is that we go back to a 2-week sitting. Seems very bizarre that we would go to a 3-week sitting and then try and extend the hours which we're here for, given the fact that there's been a drive to be more family friendly in our sitting times. And whilst it doesn't bother me personally, I was quite happy, didn't find it overly burdensome or onerous to come in every 2 weeks. or to log on every 2 weeks for state's business. And it seems that would be the obvious thing to do rather than creating a new system where we sit later on fewer days when I think the old system worked perfectly well.
Thank you. There is, of course, a PPC consultation on the frequency of sit-ins at the moment, which would be a good point to make that point. Any other member wish to speak on the arrangement of public business? If not, Deputy Alves, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you, sir, and thank you for reminding members of the consultation that's currently in place. I would be reluctant to extend the hours for the reasons that Deputy Tadia raised there, that we have tried obviously to go to as family friendly as we can. However, I am in the hands of the Assembly, and I'm happy to hear from members if they would prefer to sit later, or indeed, I think in the past we have sat on a Monday before, so I'm happy to hear from members on that. So with that, sir, I propose public business. Thank you.
Yes, Deputy Young, I had hoped to bring things to a conclusion. Is this a pertinent intervention just before we bring the sit-in to an end?
Yeah, I think it might be, sir. I think the chairman of PPC mentioned about sitting on the Monday. It did occur to me that if we did the questions on Monday afternoon, I think that would make it more likely that we would get through the business on the remaining days.
Well, as we've reached the end of the arrangement of public business, and as I think Deputy Alves has undertaken to have some conversations, perhaps the best thing is to have those conversations, and the proposal can be made before the next sit-in. The members can bear in mind the possibility of Monday afternoon being used on the 19th of July, but obviously if there's significant problems with that, they can make that point to Deputy Alves and she can bring that to a conclusion. If that seems like a reasonable suggestion, Deputy Alves?
Yes, thank you, sir.
In which case the arrangement of public business has been proposed. There have been no amendments to it, so I'm going to take it as adopted on a standard vote, and the Assembly is adjourned at the moment till Tuesday, 20th of July at 9:30.